Hi guys, welcome to another video. Now in today's video I'm actually filming in South Northumberland on the coast. I'm actually using the film camera. I'm going to take a black and white long exposure of the posts out at sea, but that has absolutely zero relevance to this video because this video is going to be all about why I purchased the Olympus Pen-F in 2025 and really, would I do it again? Right, so before we get fully into this discussion, I think the first thing I'm going to have to really point out is that this is not a review of the Olympus Pen-F. It's been reviewed numerous times throughout the last 9 years. So really, we don't need another one. I really want to discuss more the reasons why I chose to purchase this camera, because I did purchase it for a very singular purpose. And that singular purpose was a trip I had planned with my eldest son to Berlin. Now, he's just finished school, so he was 16, and it was a bit of a surprise trip for him. And I decided straight from the offset that it wasn't going to be a photography trip, but I did know that I wanted to take a camera. I'm a photographer after all. It's only natural that I'm going to want to take some photos of a new city that I've never been to, especially when it's Berlin, which I knew was going to be quite photogenic. So at the time, I had a few choices of cameras, and I could have taken my Fujifilm X-E4, and that was a prime contender, but as strange as it may sound, I knew straight from the offset that I wanted to take a Micro Four Thirds camera. Now, I had literally just got rid of the OM1 because I was finding the OM1 a little bit too big for my requirements, because I use other cameras and I didn't need another camera with the same sort of size. So I started looking again at my options, and I have to be honest, for some reason I've always fancied trying an Olympus Pen-F. I've never tried one. I've heard good things about it, and I decided, well, you know what, let's get one and give that a whirl. And what I will say first of all is that I think it's overpriced for what you're getting. It's old technology and it cost me about £800. I do think it's overpriced, but the next thing I will say is it is an absolute thing of beauty. It's such a nice thing to hold, you know, it does look really good. And there is an element of truth in that. If you like how a camera looks and you like how it holds, then you're more likely to use it more. So yeah, I don't see a camera looking good being a negative at all. But the next thing is, I would say that I considered taking a zoom lens with it, but instead I opted to take 3 prime lenses. So I took the 7 Artisans 10mm prime with me, which of course I have reviewed in another video. I took the supposedly Panasonic 15mm prime, and of course my version was the DJI one, so it was the drone lens, but you know what, it's a cracking lens. Again, I've reviewed that. Another brilliant lens. And the third and final lens was the 45mm 1.8, which again was another one I used for my drone. So I had 3 different primes with me, which all were really small, nice and compact, and produced really nice results. Now, I didn't take a tripod, which is another reason for going for primes, because obviously the IBIS system on the Pen-F is an older IBIS system. So I didn't really expect it to be up to like the OM5 and the OM1 standards, but I still didn't want to take a tripod. So really a combination of things, a combination of how the camera looked, how it felt in the hand. It felt better with primes. So I took 3 primes, all fairly fast, so I could use them in low light situations without having to use any sort of tripod, because I just didn't want to carry a tripod. We took very little with us. We were nice and light. It was a mini city break. So I took a mini city break suitable camera, and it was the Olympus Pen-F. But how did it perform? And I've got to say, amazingly well. I had absolutely no complaints with the image quality. This camera is nearly a decade old, but it still produces really nice results. I think the sensor is up there with the OM1 sensor. Okay, the OM1 sensor is a more modern sensor. It would be better for video. It'd be better for tracking, all that faster readout, all that jazz. But if we're just talking from a pure photo point of view, the Pen-F produces gorgeous photos. But what I'm going to do before I talk any more about the camera is I'm going to put up a selection of my favourite photos from Berlin and let you be the judge of the final image quality it can produce. Right, let's talk about the practicality of using the Olympus Pen-F in Berlin. Now what I did, I walked around, I had a really small backpack, small enough to sort of put underneath the airplane seat. So when we got to Berlin, I took this clip out, put the clip on the strap, had the release plate attached to the bottom of the camera, and walked around with the Olympus Pen-F here, hanging off with a prime lens on. Then generally it was the 15mm I was walking around with, because it was a wonderful all-rounder lens. But occasionally I did have to switch to the 45 when I needed a bit more zoom. And there were times when I went to the 10mm because I needed something wider, but admittedly not as many. I don't really use wide angles that much, so that wasn't too much of an issue. But what was an issue was it was hot, we did walk lots, and changing lenses backwards and forwards was a pain, I'll be honest. It was an absolute pain. In hindsight, I really regret not taking a zoom with me. Now, my son, he had these Olympus EPL1 with him, and he had the 12 to 32mm zoom, so he was okay. He could just zoom in and out as required, but me, I have to keep stopping, taking my bag off, swapping lenses over, and do that throughout the day, and that was a pain, and that did sort of kill the creativity for me. I did find at times I was just a little bit too lazy to swap lenses for the sake of it. Now, I would have liked better IBIS. Better IBIS combined with, especially combined with the fast primes, would have been really nice. But I think even I would have taken better IBIS over using fast primes and using a slower zoom. Would have been a better walking around a city combination. And I knew it was going to be a gamble. And so I think I would have got a lot more photos if I'd have had a zoom and a camera with better IBIS. A bit like something that I could have probably got for quite similar costs that was newer. And I think what's springing to mind is probably the OM5. I think the OM5 wouldn't have cost that much more. And I think it probably would have been a better camera to walk around. Okay, I wouldn't have had it on the plate because of the tripod mount issues, but I could have put it on a strap, it would have been small. That coupled with a 12 to 45 f4 Pro would have been a brilliant combination. I do regret my choice of cameras in some ways. So, my thoughts about the Olympus Pen-F in 2025. First of all, I still don't think there's a camera available at the moment that gives you that sort of rangefinder experience in Micro Four Thirds. It really does nail that. However, it doesn't nail it like a Fuji X Pro 2 does, because you do feel like you're still using something like an EM5 Mark III perhaps. And by that, I mean the actual operations, the PASM dials, things like that. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just an observation. And I'm not saying that the Fujis get it better, I'm just saying it's very different. But I do think that the Olympus Pen-F is way overpriced for the technology you're getting. Yes, it produces really nice photos, but so do so many other cameras nowadays, which are cheaper. So I do think that's something you do have to really keep in mind, because I think for the Pen-F you're paying for the form, you're paying for the look. And don't get me wrong, you're going to hear this so many times in this video, it's a gorgeous camera, but you're paying for it, you're paying for the looks. And I do think it's overpriced. So for that very reason, I probably wouldn't or couldn't recommend you go out and buy it, unless you really want to have a camera that looks like that. But image quality wise, brilliant, no complaints. Operation, really no complaints. I did find a couple of times it would hang up on you, and it seems to be a common issue that if you have the screen turned in on itself and use it just as a viewfinder and bring it back up to your eye, and the screen's closed in but the camera's still on, what you will find sometimes is that basically it will hang on itself and you have to take the batch out and put it back in. Apparently it's a common problem. I think may have been rectified in later firmwares, but I couldn't update the firmware because it was an old camera with a really old USB mount, and I'm sure it was a USB, and because of that, because of the cable, I haven't got one of the cables to do the firmware upgrade. If I recall rightly, it may have been I had to use a PC as well, and I've got a Mac, so there was various reasons going on there. I couldn't upgrade the firmware, so it wasn't the end of the world. It didn't do it all the time, but yeah, it was a pain when it did do it, when you had to lift it up. I think if I recall correctly, it used to be when it would go into sleep and you tried to power it back up and bring it to your eye. Anyway, not really the end of the world, just more of an annoyance. But image quality wise, great. And you would have seen in some other videos I've shot, you know, I had no complaints with the photos. I really like them. And I do think it produced a really nice black and white. Now I suppose this brings us to the burning question of what happened to my Olympus Pen-F? Why haven't you seen it in recent videos? And the honest answer is it's complicated. I'm a full-time professional photographer. I generally need gear. Well, I generally used to need gear that would be good all-rounders. And unfortunately, the lack of any decent video on the Olympus Pen-F meant it came down in the rankings of cameras that should be kept. Up until July, I was doing weddings, but now I've stopped weddings. I've finished them after 15 years of shooting weddings. I no longer shoot weddings, which does work in the favour for Micro Four Thirds system in fairness, because I've used Micro Four Thirds for weddings and I've never found it that enjoyable experience. However, at the end of July, start of August, I ended up being confined to bed with a hip problem, which I don't want to go too much in. I have discussed the points within videos, but the long shot is that I had to get rid of some gear because it wasn't being used, and because I hadn't got any decent zooms for the Pen-F and I wasn't using it because I'd use it for Berlin, I had bought it for Berlin, I decided to get rid of that camera first of all, and I instantly regretted that decision, I'll be honest. I think part of me knows that I always need to have a Micro Four Thirds camera in my life, and what I do say, and I say this quite often, is I use Micro Four Thirds every month for paid work because my drone is Micro Four Thirds. And I do have old Micro Four Thirds cameras kicking around the house. Yeah, I made the mistake of selling the Pen-F and instantly regretted it, and had a lot of time lying in bed, unable to go out taking photos, to think about what I should have done. So if you've watched some of my other videos recently, you will see I've been using a medium format system. In particular, I've been using the Fujifilm GFX 100 RF. Brilliant camera, love it. If I'm going out, probably on a walk, taking the tripod, want to shoot panoramics, it's the camera I'm going to take. But it's rubbish for other things. For example, handheld. Handheld, it's okay. It's got a leaf shutter, it's all right. But I know for a fact that a little Micro Four Thirds camera like the OM5 or the OM1, maybe even the OM3, is going to give me considerably better IBIS, in-body image stabilization, or especially as the GFX 100 RF hasn't even got it. Which means I don't have to take a tripod. Now, as I mentioned before, hip troubles. So I need to keep weight down on occasions, which is another reason why I've been using the GFX 100 RF, because it means I can take my panoramics, which I love doing, and I can keep the weight down a bit. But there are times when I want to just go out on a bike and have the flexibility to be able to get in woodland and be able to still take a shot, where I do think there's no competition for a good Micro Four Thirds camera. I really do believe that. I think Micro Four Thirds is so underrated, apart from by the people who actually use it. But I think everybody else just totally underrates Micro Four Thirds, and I don't get it. And I think there's a degree of digital photography all being about gear that the people who don't rate Micro Four Thirds are the people who don't use it. They're your full frame users who will turn around and say, like, you know, your sensor's too small, it's no good for anything. Absolute rubbish, you know. Micro Four Thirds can produce beautiful results. And I really do think in my setup, and I'm going to have to add this because it's my setup, and it's all personal, because I've been getting a bit of grief about a recent GFX video where people have been telling me about my choices are wrong. Well, you know, they're my choices. If I want to use certain gear, I'll use certain gear, and that's fine. I don't tell you what to use, so don't tell me what to use, if you know what I mean. And I do feel that in my setup at the moment and where I want to take my photography, and in particular take this channel, that I need to get another Micro Four Thirds camera back into my life. And I'm going to, in the next couple of days, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm getting, and that camera is going to be my camera for biking. It's going to be my camera for macro, and I really don't believe other camera systems can do macro as good as Micro Four Thirds can. I really don't. I do think it is the best format for macro, and obviously we're in macro season now. As you've just seen, or it might be seen next week, depends when this video goes live. I know I was out with the Fuji shooting macro, and I'll be honest, the Fujifilm X-T5, it's a good camera for the property side of my business. I've got an 8mm lens for it, it's great. For my personal stuff, I don't particularly like it. I'm not that taken. It does good video and it does good wide angles for properties, and that's what I mainly do now for paid work. And you have to remember, YouTube for me is not paid, so my property work is my paid stuff, and it needs to, I need gear that works, and that just does those 2 roles perfectly. That's all I need it to do. And apart from that, I'm not that bothered about taking it out with a 60mm macro. I was finding I was having to be too close, and it's still only half size reproduction. You know, I could take, for example, an OM5 with a 60mm macro on it, and I would have such a powerful little macro option for producing macro images. And if I start working out the costs, you know, it's not that much more expensive than buying the 80mm macro for the Fujifilm. And I know definitely which system I would prefer to use. So I'm going off at a tangent, aren't I? So the way I see it, for my big landscapes where I maybe want to shoot panoramics, I will use the GFX 100RF. For macro, walking around cities, which is a really big one, anything handheld. If I'm out on bikes, if I'm doing anything but more active, if I'm just taking a camera just in case, I think a Micro Four Thirds system is the best option. You may have seen me using the Fujifilm X-Half. That's really just to try it out, but I'll be honest, it's for the money, it's not really doing it for me. It's a nice camera, but for the money, no. And finally, and it's all about the enjoyment factor, I like taking things like this out, shooting a bit of film here and there. It's expensive, I don't do it very often, but you know what, when I do it, I enjoy it, and for me, photography has to be about enjoyment. So the tide's coming in, so I'm going to have to wrap this video up pretty quickly. So going forward with the channel, as you will have seen, there's been a lot of Fujifilm content recently, not so much Micro Four Thirds, and that hasn't been anything to do with the fact of me not enjoying Micro Four Thirds or me moving away from Micro Four Thirds even. It's just been circumstances, it's been illnesses, it's been in between camera systems, it's just been getting a feel for exactly what I want to photograph, because I'm in a nice position now, not doing weddings. So basically, in future videos, you're pretty much going to see me using 3 different cameras. GFX 100RF, this lovely little thing here, which I still can't believe is 40 years old, and a new Micro Four Thirds camera, which I'm pretty positive I know what I'm getting. But yeah, you're just going to have to hang around and subscribe to the channel and watch out, because you'll find out in a couple of videos time, I would think. So yeah, so going back to the Olympus Pen-F, which was the whole point of this conversation. Great camera, I think it's overpriced. Would I buy it again? Yes, but it would have to be cheaper, and that is the honest truth. So I really can't recommend it. But on that note, guys, I'm going to have to go because I'm going to get wet feet. I've got to get this shot in the bag. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking out this long. This might be quite a long video of just me ranting on, but I do apologise. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up. Maybe subscribe to the channel if you haven't, especially if you want to see some Micro Four Thirds stuff in the future, coming very, very soon. And yeah, on that note, thanks again, and I'll see you soon for another one.